Good evening and welcome to the Monday, March 14th, 2022 Plan Commission and Commission for Citizen Involvement meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Iris, would you please call the roll?
Buchanan?
Here.
Heath?
Here.
Leek?
Here.
Pepe?
Here.
Phillips?
Here.
Rigby is excused and Stewart is excused.
Thank you. We have quorum. So first on our agenda tonight is a council update. I see we have Councilor Mans with us. So Councilor Mans, thank you for joining tonight and giving us a council update. If you'd like to proceed.
Yes, I'm going to give you more of a preview than a past view, unless you would prefer that, so that you know what may be coming down the pipeline on our next meeting. Our next meeting will not be until this Thursday, as we sent a contingent of folks to Washington, D.C. to the League of Cities. So therefore, our next meeting will be 3 p.m. on Thursday, the 17th. Of interest to this particular group, we will have study session on residential demolition and non-conforming development, which I know there has been quite a bit of discussion about. Emails have been sent from citizens. Commentary has been made from citizens. So that is one of our study sessions. I'm sure that will be lively, to say the least. The other study session that we have is the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center with regards to sustainability. So if there is someone in this group, or if you know of someone, that would be an interesting one to take a look at. Council is going to move, or hopefully discuss at the very least, our Parks and Recreation land acquisition policy. That way we will have some clarity around that, as that's, believe it or not, not anything that we have formally adopted in the past. We have a lot of professional service consent agenda items. And other than that, the study sessions are truly going to be our big ticket item, particularly, as I said, around demolition, I believe. I could be wrong, but I believe. Is there any questions of me or anything that someone would like to know on previous meetings that I haven't already reported on?
Thank you, Councilor Mans. Commissioners, any questions for Councilor Mans? I see none. Thank you for the update, Councilor Mans.
I will remain online. I'll just blank myself and devolume.
Right, thank you. Thank you. Next on the agenda is public comment. This is regarding issues not on the agenda. Iris, was there anyone who wished to make public comment tonight?
No.
Thank you. We'll move on. Next on our agenda is Commission for Citizen Involvement, general updates. I really didn't have anything for citizen involvement general updates. As Councilor Mans had mentioned, we did receive a lot of feedback from the neighborhoods and others who are interested in demolition. So thank you to everybody that provided that feedback. You know, we're really looking forward to you know, having the Plan Commission work on that issue and working with council. So we appreciate all that feedback that was given. And then along those lines, since there is such a kind of strong interest for demolition, as well as some other items that we're going to be discussing on our agenda, I am wanting to really kick off our neighborhood tours. So one of the proposed items, and I think we can talk about later on, is looking at, can we take a tour and look at some demolition examples, walk the neighborhood. So we'll be looking at that. Then also on our goals tonight, we'll be talking about one of the Palisades Neighborhood Association goals is kind of the overlay they're looking at. So there might be an opportunity to the Palisade Neighborhood Association overlay. So to walk that section of the Palisade Neighborhood Association and see, you know, the homes in that area. And then in general, we'll start forward looking for other opportunities for tours. So I guess my message here is to the neighborhoods. If you'd like the Plan Commission to come out and take a tour of your neighborhood, please contact us and let us know. We're very interested in working with the neighborhoods, businesses, all the community members in seeing issues firsthand that relate to planning and development. So let us know. All right, move on to the next agenda item, which are minutes. I think we'll look at, are there any comments or changes that anyone wishes to make to either the January 24th, 2022 meeting minutes or the February 14th, 2022 meeting minutes? If there's no comments or changes requested, then we'll look at approving both of them. I see none. Is there a motion to approve the January 24th, 2022 and February 14th, 2022 meeting minutes?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes for January 24th, 2022 and February 14th, 2022.
Second.
Commissioner Lee made a motion to approve the minutes for January 24th and February 14th, 2022. Vice Chair Pepe made a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
I abstain on the February 14th. I wasn't here, but.
Sure. And then any abstains? Commissioner Leek, there's one abstain. Yeah. Two? Two abstains. All right, thank you. The minutes are approved. So we'll move on then to item number 7 on our agenda. This is a work session, the Planning Commission Goals and Work Program. Public comments are accepted. The commission will receive an update on the city council goals and discuss the commission goals and work program. Staff coordinator is Scot Siegel, Community Development Director. Director Siegel, would you like to give us an introduction to tonight's work session on the Plan Commission Goals and Work Program?
Thank you, Chair Heap. Good evening, commissioners. The City Council adopted their goals recently for 2022. And they're really, I would say there's one goal that is squarely in the Planning Commission's court, and it's something that you've been working on for over a year, going on 2 years, and I don't have to say what it is, you know what I'm talking about, House Bill 2001. There's some action items that are related to that I'll cover in just a moment, but I wanted to just give you an overview of some of the other goals that the council has established that I think have some, perhaps some involvement or some input from the Planning Commission, depending on how they're implemented. So there are 3 areas what I'd put as maybe. So the first of which is supporting business investment and job creation in Lake Oswego. And one of the initiatives under that goal is to adopt an economic development action plan, or strategy, action plan, and resource plan. And really what that means is developing more of a proactive approach toward business investment and economic development in Lake Oswego. We do have an economic development policy, if you will, in our comprehensive plan. One of the elements of that plan is economic vitality, and it's really prioritizing land use planning. So this is something that does come before the Planning Commission. And when the city last updated its comprehensive plan in 2013, 2014, the city adopted, the Planning Commission reviewed and recommended, and the council adopted an economic opportunities analysis. We may be revisiting that economic opportunities analysis depending on the direction that this economic development strategy goes. Beyond that, there could be a number of strategies that could be land use oriented, could be a review and update to our development code that might make it more business friendly in some ways. I mean, we have a very complex code, and it's obviously balancing a lot of very high priority goals and community development. But that is one of the areas that we've talked with the council and the Chamber of Commerce about, is if there are areas in our or parts of our process, particularly with land use planning, that could be improved in a way that would support business investment, job creation, while maintaining community standards. So, that is one aspect of the business investment, job creation goal that could come before the Planning Commission. And really the work program around that is that the City Council has held 2 study sessions now, one with the Chamber of Commerce, Chamber Board in September, then a second study session was held in December where they went over a list of possible strategies or actions that the city might take. And now we're in a process of really vetting that, looking at that both internally within the organization and then also coming back to the council and collaborating with the chamber and other community partners to really kind of set a vision or direction of where the council would like to go with that. So it's very early, I would say, in the kind of the action plan development, but potentially that could be something that comes before the Planning Commission. So I'll pause there and we can keep going, but were there any questions or any feedback about that particular goal? It's not on the Planning Commission's work program yet.
No questions, Director Siegel.
Okay. The second topic that I would put as a yes, it is germane to the Planning Commission, and actually it's applicable to all of the city's boards and commissions, although there's no specific action plan called for the Planning Commission, and that is with regard to fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion in Lake Oswego and in the city as an organization. That's a council goal. It's an ongoing goal. It's not a destination that we're going to get to, but it's an ongoing process and really a culture, I'd say organizational development piece that the council and the city as an organization have prioritized. One of the actions from that was that came out of the DEI task force was to really improve the recruitment and retention process for city boards and commissions. Even exceeding the excellent sort of program that we have in place, so that it is more inclusive and more open. I'd say bringing in voices who wouldn't otherwise ordinarily be represented in our volunteer groups. And so one of the things the council did a couple of years ago, you may recall, maybe 3 years ago now, was rather than having the openings on the boards and commissions advertised and those recruitments held individually for each board or commission as the vacancies occurred, the city has held this recruitment event, which is really for all the boards and commissions that may have openings or that may have a need for alternates, and that's coming up again this year in the spring. And I think, my observation of that, and perhaps you would have some feedback for the council on that as well, is that I think it really has encouraged people to turn out and to apply for these positions that they may not otherwise think about applying for, because one of the sort of dynamics with that is that if you apply for, say, the library board, because you're interested in the library board, and it turns out that there are other applicants who are maybe better suited, better sort of qualified or have that experience directly, but there are other areas through the interview process that the council or the interview panel recognizes and says, this individual really has, an interest in sustainability as well, or some other aspect of, city policy or operations, and then they can have a conversation with, with that resident, say, hey, had you thought about, are you interested perhaps, and so it really opens up opportunities for people. So it's something that, I know as volunteers that you really are directly involved in that, and you've all applied for positions, you've been through the process, but we kind of see that continuing to evolve, and not only with the volunteer recruitment process, but just with the boards and commissions and their operations and how we institutionalize that in our public hearings, or when the commission is, when we're working, the staff and the commission are developing a public involvement process around a long-range planning project. How do we make sure we're reaching people in the community who wouldn't ordinarily participate or perhaps would want to participate in a different way? I'd be interested in any feedback or any thoughts that you have around that, because I know that during COVID, we really had to develop new ways of reaching out, and all of the meetings that were held particularly for House Bill 2001 implementation, virtual meetings, 100%. And I know that just from watching that as sort of an outside observer, that there were people attending those meetings and participating who, I don't think we had seen show up for public meetings in person necessarily. So that's a council goal, and I think we'll continue to see some opportunities for the Planning Commission to move that initiative forward. So any questions or or thoughts around that? No, okay. So the next area that is not directly in the Planning Commission's court, but certainly there could be action items that come out of this with climate change, climate action. So combating climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and strengthening the community's resilience to climate impact. That's an ongoing council goal. It really speaks to implementing or refining the climate action plan that we have. And a couple of action items there that I think pertain to the Planning Commission, potentially, one of which is really promoting the distribution or the deployment of EV charging stations in the community. I know this is something that commissioners have talked about in the past, and we've tried to prioritize that, and I think there was some sort of collaboration or some work with SAB that individual commissioners had engaged in or had initiated on their own, sort of their own accord. There are a number of other, I guess, activities that are happening at the state level that could really help promote the distribution of EV charging stations. And so that's something that we're tracking. For one, there's the governor's executive order 2005 or 2004 or 2005 that established the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking process. It's kind of a mouthful, but we've, I think, talked about this before. So the Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Land Conservation and Development, Department of Transportation, Energy, and Housing and Community Services, I think, all have different responsibilities under that executive order to promulgate rules or to develop programs or other incentives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so, the state's looking at their vehicle fleet. ODOT is, they're looking at transportation planning. And so one of the actions that will come from that through the rulemaking process that the Planning Commission will eventually have some involvement with is updating our transportation system plan. And so that's on the Planning Commission's work program. It is one of the goals, I think, that you did establish earlier this year, was to begin planning under the state climate-friendly and equitable communities rules. And that's one of the changes that we're likely to see is updating our transportation plan. Availability and use of green energy in the community. Our development code does allow for rooftop solar arrays. Wind energy there's not a lot of wind potential here, but solar is certainly something that we're going to see more of. Our code allows for it, but I think it's something that, like anything else, it's continuous improvement. We want to look at how we can really foster that. So again, it's not, that climate change goal of the councils is not something that was really directed or direction provided to the Planning Commission to work on, but it's something I think that you've identified in your goals in your work program. So there it is. Urban and Community Forestry Plan is another initiative under that climate action goal. And so the council has prioritized an update to the Urban and Community Forestry Plan through an evaluation of the 2022 State of the Urban Forest Report. And so it's kind of a long way of saying we need good data before we can start really looking at policy. And so by updating the State of the Urban Forest Report, what that will give the city or give the council some metrics around how we're doing, how we're performing with tree canopy cover in the community, how we, and not only the overall percentage of canopy, but the composition of the urban forest and really the species and the health of the trees in our community, because with a warmer climate and more extreme weather and everything else, it's something that we need to pay attention to. And when that report was last produced, or when it was first created in 2009, that wasn't really as high, on our radar. Also looking at wildfire risk. So again, not something that would come before the Planning Commission necessarily, unless the council decides that we need to in some way retool our development code or look at the comprehensive plan in some way that would create a new policy framework for managing the urban forest. So, again, I think that's one of the areas that we'll continue to update the commission and see if there's work for you to do there. The next, or the fourth item, actually, I'd say, that is not directly applicable, but it could result in some work for the Planning Commission, is that next, or the second to last goal on that page, invest in Lake Oswego's high-quality parks, natural areas, and recreational amenities. So the second bullet, or the second initiative, is to adopt a natural areas habitat management plan. And this is really for public lands, and it's looking more systematically at forest lands or habitat and resource areas on city parks and open spaces. And so, the city has obviously actively manages those areas, everything from removing invasive species and working with friends groups in the community to do that, to protecting and restoring streams and wetlands. And there's a lot of work that goes into just maintaining a park. What this is about is looking at these areas more, I guess, more systematically. So rather than doing a park project, one park project at a time, and just sort of tactically going in and taking care of a problem on a particular property, looking at the ecosystem. So for example, we have parklands that are very densely forested and are sort of your typical, what we think of was, softwood or Doug fir, western hemlock, red cedar forest. These are wetter areas. We also have forest lands or resource areas that are more oak savanna. So you go over to the other side of Childs Road or up around Cook's Butte and sort of the more southern exposure part of our community, and up in Forest Highlands and other areas that have that southern aspect where it's a little drier, or the geology drains a lot more, and so we have species that are more arid. So the Parks Department would look at those areas, each of those areas individually, and come up with a management plan that would entail everything from pest management to wildfire fuels reduction, if that's something that is important there, to just good forest health and habitat. And so again, it's more of an operations need, or I should say, if in the process of developing these plans, the Parks Department says, the city, your zoning regulations or your tree code or some other policy that we have in place is not supportive, it's actually impeding what nature or what science is telling us is the right way to manage these areas, we want to look at that. So that's something that could come before the Planning Commission if we're looking at the sensitive lands regulations, for example, if there's some change that's really warranted there. Other than that, I'm not seeing really a very active role for the Planning Commission in that one, but did you have any feedback or any questions about that goal?
I think it's a really important topic, because if you walk through Springbrook Park, or if you drive past West Lake's open space, those trees are all dying, they're all coming down. And maybe it's the life cycle of those trees, but we need to be talking about reforesting them. So maybe it's not just an overall thing, but there's certain areas that might need some intensive work, more so than others. My 2 cents.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions about that?
Maybe if I can just back up a little bit, Director Siegel, going back to some of the goals we were touching on earlier with Governor Brown's Executive Order 20-04, where it's, she quoted, exercise any and all authority and discretion to meet Oregon's climate pollution reduction goals. And then they were fairly prescriptive. We've been seeing things come out of the DLCD related to, what's Metro's role and their expectation of the metro area. And then, what is the overall state goal. And so in the climate friendly kind of area that they're looking at adopting, they've put out some specific timelines, like study potential climate friendly areas by June 30th, 2023, adopt zoning and comprehensive plan amendments by June 30th, 2024. So do we anticipate that indeed some of that work should start in 2022 to at least align with the local government implementation of studying potential climate-friendly areas by June 30th, 2023?
Yeah, Chair, that's a good question because they're still developing the rules, or the rules have gone, or they're going to a hearing now with LCDC, Land Conservation Development Commission, and there's still getting a lot of input from local jurisdictions and from the League of Oregon Cities, among others. And so, really what the final work product will look like remains to be seen. But we are tracking that, and the the timeline that was developed for the Planning Commission's goals. So looking at, you should have that number 4. Those were our best guesses at that particular point in time as to when we would be expected to deliver each of those elements. So updates to the parking code, 2023, designating climate-friendly areas. We said 2024 because the metro jurisdictions, what we've advocated for and what I believe we were seeing in the latest iteration of the rules was that climate-friendly areas in the 24 metro jurisdictions would be consistent with town centers and, I guess, town centers and regional centers as designated in Metro's functional plan. So we shouldn't have to go through that process of designating those areas because we've already done this planning, and Metro has already done its own, climate action plan. So they've already prepared that. So what we're thinking is that we'll have we will not have to go through that process to determine it locally, which could be a positive or a negative, depending on how you look at that. And then secondly, it is sort of preordained or prescribed by the Metro Functional Plan. The other actions here on updating our housing code or zoning code for housing 2025, that's what would need to change in our code specific to these climate-friendly areas. And then finally, an update to the transportation system plan, which in other parts of the state, I think they are saying 2023, but an update to TSPs, what they're called, in the Portland area would follow Metro's adoption of an update to the regional transportation plan. So, it just sort of follows logically that we would develop our transportation plan after the regional plan is framed up. I hope I haven't made that more confusing, but there's a lot of moving parts. We're trying to get it in the right sequence. Metro and all the other cities and counties in our area have been working very closely together, and then also advocating through the League of Oregon Cities to try to get this, kind of designed correctly so it makes sense.
Do we avoid some of this because we're a town of less than 50,000, or since we're in the Portland metro area, we're just part of it?
We do not avoid any of it, really, but so the population thresholds that they're looking at would set different requirements for different densities or different levels of development, if you will, like building height is one of the standards that would vary based on the size of the population. And so cities that have population between 40,000 and 50,000 would be in one tier. And so, for example, in our town centers, according to the draft that we've seen and that appears to be going to a hearing, in our town centers in the downtown and in Lake Grove, building height we would have to allow a height of 60 feet. In our downtown, we currently allow a height of 60 feet, so it's consistent with that. But Lake Grove, the maximum height is 45 feet, so you can kind of see how this is potentially changing. And it's really intended to promote more intensive development that's in areas that are walkable to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a very large body of work that we're going to be expected to do over, as you can see here, at least 3 years. And we would expect to see, funding coming from the state for this. We've advocated for that. We hope that that'll come to fruition.
Did they already say they're going to fund money to pay for this?
Yeah, I think they're just trying to figure out the best mechanism to do that because some of the grant programs that the state administers for this type of planning take too long for the procurement process and actually getting the intergovernmental agreements signed to get to hire the consultants to do the work. So that's, I think, the biggest challenge. And
Didn't they do that for middle housing, though?
They did, and middle housing, I think, is a good example. It's an example of that process working well.
Yeah.
And the kind of the trick or the difficulty with this is that most of the money for this type of work is federal funding that is allocated to ODOT, that ODOT can use for this type of activity, but it has different contracting requirements that take longer. So our input to the state was, our city supports the intent here, and we've had feedback on the specific rules, but really, if the expectation is to complete certain things by certain times, we need to know that there's funding and there's a way to actually deliver that. Otherwise, it's not meeting the governor's intent. It's not meeting the goal.
Director Siegel, just a couple comments on that. Yeah, when I was reviewing the DLCD report, it did say that. So it laid out the timeframes. 2022, they had adoption, impact statements, work sessions, public hearings, and then right after that, they specifically called out DLCD funding for local community engagement. So it looks like that is a part of their plan. Yeah. The other thing I want to call out that was kind of interesting, and I think especially for us here in Lake Oswego, was you touched upon it, was kind of the parking. That it's really a behavioral change that they're going after, that they want to reduce the mandates. They feel like, the more parking that we mandate, it creates this behavior that we want to drive more. And so it looks like they're wanting to reverse that and say, let's specifically go after not bundling, parking with the different types of, buildings and ownership. Yeah, densities. So, reduce parking mandates for certain types of development in key areas, multifamily residences under 750 square feet, affordable housing, and treatment facilities and homes for people with disabilities. So I think that should be interesting work, because I think a lot of the work we've done on the Plan Commission is looking at how do we improve parking, how do we make it more available, how do we address areas that have, limited parking, and this seems to be going a little bit in the opposite direction that the state is directing us, and so that should be interesting work.
That's our state for us.
Yeah, and that is going to be an interesting exercise to go through that, because it's not really, parking is not a one-size-fits-all sort of policy, because you have areas like our downtown that do have parking, public parking, quite a bit of it actually on the street, and also in these parking structures that the city has and parking lots, the city has made that investment. But other commercial areas of the city, like Lake Grove, that public parking, or not even shared parking, doesn't even exist. So it's really sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. Right. Were there other comments or questions about that, or any of the items that I've covered so far? Anything else? So,
No other questions.
Okay. Right. So really the one goal that is squarely in the Planning Commission's court, and we continue to work on it, you've got a public hearing scheduled for April 11th, is on implementation of House Bill 2001. And so the council has really prioritized this. Obviously, it's something that the city is wanting to create standards in order to maintain this community's quality of life, and to do so in a way that we're adopting codes that meet the requirements of the bill, and are really tailored to the needs of the community, and that to the extent that we can maintain neighborhood character and quality of life. So that work continues, but we're already planning ahead for the next phase, or sort of the next wave of housing policy work with House Bill 2003. And so on your forecast, you can see that we've got a number of work sessions that are already tentatively scheduled out in the fall to begin work on that, which is really what we intend to do, is engage the Planning Commission and also public input, at least initially, on our scope for how we go about updating the housing needs analysis for the city, what kind of public involvement the Planning Commission would want to see as part of that effort, because this is going to be more than just a technical study. In the past, cities would create a housing needs analysis that was fairly prescribed in sort of how the state, what the state required. It was almost, you would do a vacant and buildable lands inventory. You would estimate how many housing units of all different kinds would, that inventory could support. And we would look at our zoning, and we would, try to make sure that we could meet the housing needs as sort of expressed through our population forecast. And we'll be expected to do that again with our housing needs update under House Bill 2003. But in addition to that, we're also going to be expected to prepare really a housing production strategy. So just not only looking at whether the land supply is adequate and whether it's zoned properly in order to meet that identified housing need, but what measures is the city taking along with nonprofits and other agencies that have some influence over housing, particularly low-income housing, to meet specific targets. And so we don't know what those targets are yet, because I think the process that the legislature envisioned under House Bill 2003 had the state developing, or the state, and within each region, forecasts and housing needs identified. For example, in the metro area, Metro and the counties in our area would identify, what sort of our obligation was under that bill, how much housing at various income levels would need to be, quote, produced, and then the targets would be allocated with each city or county. In our case, the city would have a target, and they haven't gone through that process yet, so or they haven't assigned that yet. So really, what we would be doing this fall is beginning to scope the process so that once we know sort of what our target is, we can do the public engagement work and do the technical work that's required in order to update our housing needs analysis. So again, it's another sort of a moving target as far as the state requirements are concerned, but we know that we will need to get started on this by this fall in order to adopt a housing needs analysis by the due date of June 2023, I think it is.
Is it housing analysis a mandate then? And how do you mandate building of certain housing types in an area that's smack up against its boundaries?
Well, yes, to answer the first question, the planning work is a mandate.
Yeah.
So the study of the identifying housing needs, identifying strategies that could produce, but are not necessarily going to, but could produce, this needed housing. Those are required, by the state. And I think the question for us, which was the same question the city faced, in 2010 when we first started scoping an update to the comprehensive plan, was, what is our vision? So we sort of revisited our vision at that time, and the consensus was, we're a city that will not sprawl out, onto farmland, that we felt at that time that we had an adequate supply of land that we could absorb the population that was forecast, and which in fact has turned out to be fairly close to what we planned for. And the same was true in 1994. So when the 1994 plan was adopted, and then we looked at it in 2010 and eventually adopted the new plan in 2014, the forecasts that were prepared back then came to fruition, and then we're tracking along in the same manner. So the question was, and it'll continue to be, are we a city that continues to infill and it's, and is growing up in some ways versus out? Or are we a city, that will grow out, or is it going to be some hybrid of the two? And so anytime you talk about growing out, of course, the first areas that you look at are the areas that are designated urban reserves.
Stafford Triangle.
By Metro, the county, and in our case, Lake Oswego, Westland, and Tualatin, who have all really joined together and formed an agreement on how we will plan for that area. So I think that's the kind of the crux of the question is we would expect to see the forecast is going to be something, it'll be something consistent with or greater than, the forecasts or the growth rates that we've experienced. That's just sort of my planning intuition tells me that based on what we've seen come out of Metro and historically that we'll see a growth rate that is either tracking along linearly or it'll be curving, upward. And so that's something that we'll be thinking about when we do this housing needs analysis. Right? This is why you're on the Planning Commission, because you want to work on this stuff.
Serious stuff.
It is. It's very, very consequential. Other discussion or feedback, questions about that?
No other questions?
So these are all the council goals, or at least the ones that I thought were germane to the work of the Planning Commission and the goals that you've established. And I don't know, Chair, if you had anything else that you wanted to cover for this work session. Happy to.
One question, I'm not sure if you touched on, there was in the council goals of prepare for process to update the plans for the Foothills District. Is that work that we foresee will be coming to the commission?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks for reminding me. I do believe that's something that would come to the Planning Commission. I don't believe it will happen this year because I think the trajectory that we're on right now with the wastewater treatment plant is that process and permitting for that treatment plan, if it goes forward as envisioned, would, that we would want to complete that process before embarking on a new plan for the area, just to know really what the footprint is going to be for that treatment plant so that we can plan accordingly, around it or incorporating it. So I think 2023 will be a year of probably, scoping and some initial planning work on that. And ultimately, any update, to the Foothills Framework Plan could come before the Planning Commission. The plan that was adopted in 2012, that was, it did it in 2010 maybe. It did two things. It was a land use plan for the area that also created an overlay zone for Foothills. So there is an overlay zone that is in the Community Development Code. It has not been applied to any properties there. It would only be activated upon having financing in place for the infrastructure that the master plan calls for. Of course, that hasn't happened yet. So then with the wastewater treatment plant coming in, a plan for that facility going in and being approved, then that would trigger an update to the Foothills Framework Plan, which would then, likely result in a revision to that overlay, or maybe just replacing it altogether because the basic physical plan for that area is going to change with the treatment plan.
All right, thank you.
Where would the funding for infrastructure come from to develop Foothills? Would that be private partnerships or?
That's going to be one of the key questions, one of the key policy questions that master plan update will need to investigate, because the original plan or the vision was for a pretty high level of development in that district, supported by an urban renewal district, an urban renewal agency or TIF, tax increment financing to support the infrastructure that would have been a public-private partnership with development in that area. Of course, there was a streetcar that was part of that concept as well, which would have brought in a lot of federal money to build at least the streetcar portion of the infrastructure. So that's, I don't know what will be, what the alternatives will be that we're looking at. I mean, that's really the purpose of looking at the plan, is to explore what options are really viable at this point.
And then just one quick question. Those are privately held properties down there. Would they be taken by eminent domain?
No, I mean, that's another, they're private properties, so, a master plan like this can come together at least a couple of different ways. I mean, one way it can come together is if there's a master developer who's interested in exploring a plan or a vision for the area, and that master developer, individually, obviously works, with the property owners to come to some agreement on, how long they're willing to have their property tied up. That's a non-government intervention way of going about planning, and it can, that can work. Another approach is where the government, the local government kind of takes the lead in trying to assemble, property. But the council has had no discussions about any of this since, the Foothills Framework
Yeah, it's
Plan
been a
was
while.
last
Okay, thank you.
considered, and the Urban Renewal District was repealed in 2012, I think. Yeah.
Thank
It's
you.
the best I can do.
Thank
That's
you.
very good.
No other questions? Anything else that we'd like to cover under the work session on the Planning Commission goals and work program? No? We can move on. Director Siegel, did staff have any more comments on the goals and the work program?
No, not this evening. Thank you, Chair. Of course, we're always, happy to kind of check in and revisit the goals and the timeline and make sure we're meeting your expectations on that. I think there's the other updates I provide under the schedule update.
All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, other business. I didn't have any other business. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Phillips.
This is probably for Mr. Siegel. Sorry to do this at the meeting, but I didn't know how to find out. We meet on things and we approve things and then they're off our plate. And I'm trying to figure out, for an example, about the Boone's Ferry construction for the multifamily housing and stuff. We did our function, but there were several issues that were somewhat, at least different opinions. And so is there a place in the city website that I just can't find that tells me, okay, the property's been bought? This is just for curiosity. We spent time on it. I'd just like to know what's going to happen and when it happens, and see if the city council took any of our concerns into, is there a place to find this stuff?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Phillips. So I think so the answer is yes. On a project like Boone's Ferry Road Housing Initiative, we will create a web page for that, and there will be a public process around the future disposition of that property, or at least in terms of the future development plans that are ultimately developed for that site. Nothing has really happened. Nothing officially, has happened. Yeah, so, right, the property's still in use as a construction staging site, and the city, will continue to use it for that until the Boone's Ferry Road project is completely closed out. The discussion, so what happened following the Planning Commission's hearings on the zoning is that your recommendation, the Commission's recommendation, went to City Council. The City Council conducted a public hearing on the zoning code amendments. Council did hear testimony both in favor and against, and relating to different aspects of that, zoning and I guess speculatively, what could develop on the site with the zoning. And it was, the code amendments were approved, so those changes are in place. The property is still owned by the city. There's no, I guess, agreement to sell the property at this point. The council did approve a non-binding intergovernmental agreement with Metro and the Housing Authority of Clackamas County last year that created a process for exploring the possibility of developing affordable housing on the site. And I think we talked about this when this came before the commission. And so one of the first tasks or obligations, I suppose, that the city said that it would do was that it would prepare the site with the proper zoning so that housing could go there. And so that has been completed now. The second element of that intergovernmental agreement was that Metro, and primarily Metro, would be exploring whether it wanted to participate or would work, with the county and the city to acquire the site or to put Metro housing bond funds toward acquisition so that affordable housing community could develop there. So, that's in process. Metro is looking at that. They toured the property, I guess a couple of weeks ago. They're looking at that. They're doing their due diligence and their feasibility study around that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate you giving us the update on what's happened, but the question was, there will be a website, and if I wanted to follow it on my own, I could do that over a period of years.
Yes,
Okay.
you would be able to follow it like any other planning project. There would be a website with new information as it becomes available.
Thank you. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I also don't want to hold up the other commissioners just for my own personal, curiosity.
Understood.
Thank
You did ask if what had happened, so I thought I'd better provide an update. Yeah.
Thank you, Director Siegel. So we will move on to other business. I didn't have any other business. Does the staff have any other business they'd like to bring up? And we'll move to schedule review.
Okay, well, your next regularly scheduled meeting is on the 28th of this month, and you have a public hearing scheduled on amendments to the special street setback for a portion of South Shore Boulevard. And you also have a work session with representatives of the Lake Grove Business Association who will be presenting to you on their concepts for amending the building design standards in the West Lake Grove and Lake Grove Village Center overlay. This again is a process that Lake Grove Business Association has been working on with the neighborhood associations in that area. And really the main objective is trying to look at ways to really modernize, or not modernize in terms of style, but update the building design standards so that they're more inclusive of building materials that are more contemporary building materials and more sustainable materials and means and methods of construction. So those are the two items scheduled for the 28th. And as I said, the next meeting after that, the 11th of April, is a public hearing on the Middle Housing Code amendments. And really the next meeting, those two meetings in April are both reserved for that item, just anticipating that you will receive public testimony on that. I did want to highlight a few dates that may be a little bit light, or at least open for scheduling, because the chair had mentioned a desire for tours, a couple of tours, and then there was also some other work that you had identified in your goal setting earlier in the year that we could talk about. So May 23rd is a date that currently does not have any business items scheduled, and July 25th. So May 23rd, July 25th, and the second meeting in November, which may actually not be great if it's Thanksgiving week, the 28th. So really those two dates in May and July. Yeah. Yeah, right. And then Chair, you had mentioned the desire to do tours with the Palisades Neighborhood Association. If you were to do a tour in the summer sometime, preceding work sessions with the Neighborhood Association, that might be a good way to prepare for the first work session with the Neighborhood Association, just something to consider.
Right. Thank you.
And then also, you wanted to tour non-conforming developments. Any feedback or direction you have on
Yeah, a
the
couple of
schedule?
questions. As we started our meeting tonight, there was a lot of discussion on the demolition code, and we mentioned that I think there's a number of counselors that are away at a meeting, I believe the League of Oregon Cities meeting, and Councilor Mann said at that council meeting they'll be picking up the discussion on demolition. So I anticipate we'll be getting some direction from council after that meeting. And I think what we heard in some emails and feedback that was coming into the Plan Commission was people are very interested in the demolition work, and they're very interested in knowing what the next steps are. So from a schedule perspective, it sounds like we just need to let the council meeting happen, do a direction check, get the council's feedback, and then at the next meeting, then we could potentially have some more dates on when we would start work on the demolition code again.
Yeah, I think that's what we're all looking for, some feedback at that meeting with the council on the 17th. And we'll have a clearer picture of what that process and really what the scope looks like, because there are a number of elements to this, some of which are, they're not land use elements as far as, the demo tax and the demolition process itself is, it's in the building code, so the council could decide what, they want to do with that, how they want to move forward, and then the non-conforming development piece of that is land use, so that depending on the direction they provide, those two could be sort of decoupled or they could be on the same track. We'll just have to wait and see.
Great, thank you, Director Siegel. Commissioner Leek, a question.
Where would I find out what some of those comments were that you were referring to?
They can be shared. I don't know if the Plan Commission, I don't think the Plan Commission email list was used, but happy to share them.
I think the council, actually, I think the city council received some direct, comments from the public or from individuals. And I don't know if those came into individual council members or council distribution. Those were not comments addressed to the Planning Commission as far as I know.
Yeah,
If we
correct.
come across any that were, we will make sure that you receive those.
But were they
next meeting.
critiques of the Planning Commission's work on demolitions?
I think people were really just wanting, I think there was a sense of urgency from some of the folks who were commenting, feeling like, demolitions, it's timely, and that it's kind of a concern today, but for the reasons that we talked about in the last work session. And I think there was a sense of urgency around it that people were expressing.
Yeah, I would agree with Director Siegel's comments. We want to move, there's a desire in the community to move very quickly on this.
Yeah.
And so, we need to balance that with the amount of time we have, working through the complex details, and then making sure we get it right. And I think that's what we said at the last commission meeting, was really trying to make sure that, we look at all the complexities, and then we come up with a good recommendation from that. So we definitely didn't abandon it. We're going to still be working on it. And I think, everybody understands it's something that's important to the community and we want to prioritize. So we'll keep moving forward on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Councilor Mans, do you have a comment?
I simply wanted to concur with what Director Siegel said, and I appreciate Commissioner Leek for asking the question. It would be anything that we received, I believe, would be in our packet, although it's a study session. So correct me if I'm wrong, Director Siegel. There may not be commentary at this point. No, it should be published. In any event, I will send you a link to that particular part of our meeting so you can take a look at it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for
Thank you.
working through this.
Thank you, Councilor Mans. Director Siegel, maybe just, I was wondering if you could describe a little bit more in our next meeting, the work on the special street setback. What will the commission be looking at?
Oh, yes, of course. And I'm trying to remember if I think Commissioner Heap, you may have been on the commission when we last made a change to the special
State
street
Street.
setback standards. And
Yes, correct.
so we'll try not to get too far into the weeds here. So you're all familiar with setbacks. Setbacks, that's something that we deal with a lot. There's a provision in the development code called special street setback. And this is a setback that is, it applies, it really, it limits what you can develop on lots. But it's measured, instead of being measured from the property line, it's measured from the center line of an adjacent and abutting street. And what it's intended to do is make way for ultimately right-of-way dedication that may be necessary in order to construct planned transportation improvements. whether it's widening a road, adding a lane, adding sidewalks or bike lanes or parking, whatever the transportation plan calls for in that area. And we do, and these special street setbacks are applied primarily along the major streets where it's at some point, the right-of-way width was not at the ultimate, dimension as to what the transportation plan called for. So these special street setbacks were established to reserve that area, but not, it's still private property. You can still use your property, but the setback for a building, for example, instead of being measured, if the setback was, 10 feet from or 25 feet from the front property line or the street, if the special street setback was, 60 feet from the center line, and the existing right-of-way was only, 30 feet or something, then your house, you may have to set your house back another 5 feet or another, 10 feet, depending on what the math works out to be in order to reserve that space. And so the application that the city has prepared and will be presenting to the Planning Commission for a public hearing, and your recommendation is it would remove the special street setback from a portion of South Shore Boulevard that it's in an area that's completely built up. It's built out, and the right of way, and it's in an area with like two different bridges, I think, so it's fairly narrow. It's constrained, and it's in this area that's built out, and there are homes that are already several that are within the special street setback. So if they were to redevelop, they wouldn't be able to replace them. There's no variance process afforded. And some properties have accessory structures, and so and fences and a number of other things. So when the city engineer looked at this, and we looked at it with her, because we were seeing some building projects in the area that were in conflict with, or may have been in conflict with this, said, well, we don't need that we don't need the right-of-way that would be created by applying the special street setback. It's an unnecessary restriction on these properties, and any future improvement that we would make on this part of South Shore Boulevard can be made with the existing right-of-way that's there. So that told me that if we have a restriction on private property that we're never going to use, we're never going to acquire the right-of-way to build the project, we can build the project without doing that, then that's a regulation that should be removed. And so that's what we're going to be presenting to you. Pardon me? Well, it's a code change, so it has to go to a hearing, but if we could, we would. Yeah. Thanks for asking. I hope that's enough information.
Yeah, just one quick, and so that section of South Shore Boulevard extends from Blue Heron Road all the way to Lakeview.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Right.
And in that whole area seems that, because to me, and I know we'll get into this, but it just seems like the majority of the issues seem to be, near the first bridge, around Blue Heron, down to maybe Canal Circle, Canal Drive, that area. But I guess we'll get into that in the hearing.
We'll get into that, and we'll be able to show there are actually properties all the way up and down the corridor that have either because the lots are substandard in size or width or some dimension and existing development. You have to look at an image
Sure.
and a map.
Okay, thank you. We look forward to that work at our next meeting.
Okay. That's all for the schedule update. Thank you.
All right, thanks. That was our last agenda item, so the meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Good night.